First, let me begin by thanking Noah and Irwin for doing this tonight. I've read the book. I've read Irwin's book, which I'm also going to try to urge everybody to read because it's a remarkable book. But it's sort of the intersection of three geniuses tonight. Irwin's historic career, I think, kind of speaks for itself. All you need to say is Rocky, Goodfellas, Raging Bull, Right Stuff, The Irishman, and that pretty much covers the last 30 years or so of important movies. Noah Isenberg is this extraordinary scholar at the University of Texas, George Christian professor, and the head of his department in UT in cinema and television. And we are going to talk about Billy Wilder. The book focuses on Wilder as a 20-something and the absolute genius writing. It ranges from the incredibly funny to the unbelievably insightful. And it is really a fun read, and it offers the opportunity to put yourself into Berlin in the 1920s before the world went to hell in a handbasket. So without further ado, let me ask Noah and Irwin to spend a little time talking about this book, the movies, Billy Wilder, and I hope a little bit about Irwin's career, because every time I hear about it, I get so excited. So thank you both for being here.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. It's a pleasure. Can I start off with a photograph?
Absolutely.
This is I don't know if you could see it well enough.
Yeah, you got
This
it.
this is a photograph.
It's upside down, Irwin.
No, it's upside down.
Of that.
No, it's upside down.
Let's flip it.
Oh wait, it's upside down.
There you go.
He would have liked that. This is a photograph of from a party we had for Billy Wilder on his 90th birthday. I'm wearing the black shirt in the back, but next to him is Sidney Pollack and Steven Spielberg, and that's Barry Levinson, and back a whole bunch of different directors. So that was for his 90th birthday.
That's a
I
wonderful.
thought you'd like to see that.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great photo. I imagine that was a nice occasion.
It was, he was really, really in great shape, except he had one, it wasn't a problem really. It was about his how he felt about himself. He was very hard of hearing the last few years of his life, and he refused to wear a hearing aid. And so when you talk to him, sometimes he didn't get exactly what you had expected from him. But when you did, it was all witty and great. But what's amazing about the book is if you go back to 1920, which is 101 years ago, he wrote as if he was writing today. His picture, for instance, of Palestine, he wrote just that little piece you have in there. You could translate that today to what's happening in Israel.
Yeah.
And a cold day in Venice, you could actually feel the chill coming off the water.
Yeah.
So I want to congratulate, but I also want to ask you, where did you find this material?
So that's a good question. There were two separate published volumes that the translator, Shelley Frisch, who happens to be here this evening, which is great. So when we get to Q&A, we can bring her into the conversation, which would be wonderful. She and I drew from these two collections, the first of which was published in Berlin in the late second half of the 90s. It was called Der Prinz von Wales geht auf Urlaub. The Prince of Wales goes on holiday, and the title piece is collected in this volume, as are a number of the other pieces that were published in the Berlin Popular Press. About a decade later, Irwin, there was a publication in Vienna that was just called Billy and spelled the way that Billy originally spelled his name, Billie. And these were the Viennese writings of young Billy Wilder. And so we drew from both of these competing anthologies and formed our own Billy Wilder on assignment from those texts. And there we didn't.
Noah, how did you come upon these books from the 90s?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a longer story, but I'll do my best to tell it relatively quickly. So I am an Angelino. We'll begin there. Was born in UCLA Hospital, but I went to UC Berkeley in the 90s as a graduate student to do a PhD in German studies. So I focused mainly on German and Austrian cinema in my studies, as well as literature. But so I knew these texts already, I think, as a graduate student, and if not as a graduate student in the early to mid 1990s, then as a junior faculty member at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, when I began writing more and more on film and teaching more film there in the department run by Janine Basinger. And with an appointment also in German studies. So I knew these texts, Irwin, the way that they originally appeared, not from archival materials, mind you, but from these two extant publications.
Well, the translations are also brilliant because they capture what I know of Billy Wilder itself, and I love the how some of the items that Billy Wilder wrote about and some of the things he lived through came out in some of the movies, and you point that out brilliantly within the book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can take no credit, however, for the translation, which is all Shelley, and it is no small feat to capture the tone, the cadence, the humor, all of that, and render it into English. And so I'm enormously grateful to her, and we all should be grateful to her for the work that she did there. I do have, Irwin, a few, since you point to the period, as we proceed, I have a number of, you showed me that wonderful photo from the 90th birthday celebration. I have a number of photos from the 20s that I'd be happy to share at some point. And also, I'd love to work in just a short film clip from People on Sunday, Menschen am Sonntag. This was a late silent picture that young Billy scripted, if you can call it that, since basically, as the story goes, he essentially dashed off different ideas and dialogue on scrap papers at the and napkins, as it were, at the Romanisches Café on Kurfürstendamm, one of the great coffee houses that he and the kind of intelligentsia, the cultural the Bohemians as well frequented. And I have a 2-minute clip from that film, a film that came out in February of 1930, but that they shot on a very, very shoestring, small budget, with a lowercase b. Edgar G. Ulmer, who was the co-director on that film, he'd already been working first at Fox. He worked as a designer for Murnau's American debut in 27, Sunrise, and then worked in the art department at Universal for a number of years. And so he brought over a little bit of American, of dollars when he went back to Berlin in the late 20s. And together with Robert Siodmak, Fred Zinnemann was the assistant cinematographer. He carried the cables, and as Billy tells it, he basically was responsible for the sun reflector when they were filming at the Nikolassee, at this wonderful lake on the outskirts of Berlin. And so I have a short clip that I'll be happy to show at some point later in our conversation. But I'm delighted to know that you were so taken with these pieces. I mean, I was speaking with Bert earlier about some of them.
Not only that, Noah, as I read the pieces about him being a dancer or for hire, I thought that would make a great movie.
Yeah,
of that man in that situation and what he had to do, and how the only thing he had was a good meal and tired feet, and how polite he had to be, and how, I mean, it's a great picture of a man working to really get bread on his plate, because what he talks about before that is the fact that he didn't have anything to eat. that he had to
Yeah.
borrow money to get it. And now he's suddenly sitting there and having, custard and
Yeah.
the best food in the world. But then he has to get up and dance and be polite and satisfy the dancers while their husbands looked on and berated him more or less. But it's a great picture of a man surviving and how he has to survive. And anyhow, it would make a great movie, I think.
It'd be a good double feature with Grand Hotel. It actually reminds me very much of the source novel by Billy's fellow Viennese Vicky Baum, who provided the source novel for the Academy Award winning picture a few years later. It was in fact she wrote that novel around the same time that Billy was working as a freelance journalist and struggling to get by.
No, it's really, really very, very taken. But a number of the stories that by the way, did you have a lot to choose from when you choose these particular stories?
We did, and we thought, and this was a good conversation that the two of us had done together, also with our editor at Princeton University Press. Which would really the question was which stories would speak to an Anglo-American audience, which stories might not translate, and we did our best to choose a representative sampling. We drew quite heavily from these two volumes, but there were those that just didn't work in the end, and made their way to the proverbial cutting room floor. But we include a lot of the text that were available to us from these two volumes.
But I tell you one thing, I found out a lot about Adolf Menu.
Menju, yeah. Well, you can see, and that's the one of the wonderful things I find in the collection is you can see that young Billy Wilder already has an eye toward America. His fascination with everything from, well, you mentioned his stint as a dancer. We opened the volume with this. This was a 4-part series that he did for the Berliner Zeitung, for one of the major newspapers in Berlin, on his experiences as a dancer for hire. But you can see that he's intensely preoccupied with all things American. And it's that much more fitting that his mother chose to call him Billy rather than calling him by his given name, which was Samuel, and chose to call him that on the basis, so the story goes at least, that she'd watched the Buffalo Bill touring show, possibly in Madison Square Garden. She was living with an uncle on Madison Avenue in Manhattan for a formative period of her young life, and she was a colossal fan as well of kind of all things American. But what's interesting with Manju and with also these capsule reviews that he did, you can see that he's got an eye toward Hollywood already as a young man in his early 20s. He begins filing these pieces at the age of 19, and the anthology spans a period when he's working up until the second half of his 20s. So he's
but,
very,
as a filmmaker, as I read the book, I kept turning pages and say, this would make a movie. This would make a movie. Winter in Venice, that would make a movie. That character, what was he doing in Venice? Why would he stay in Venice if it was so lousy as far as the cold and the not having money? And I mean, the whole picture of it. So you could see the antecedents of a great writer and a great filmmaker right when he was 22 years old in Berlin by these stories. So it's a treasure just in that. And if I was more ambitious, I would ask you, can I buy the rights to this and this story?
Yeah, we'll make you a special price.
Okay.
Special price for you, Irwin. A special price. This is like for Friends of Rick. That's the other book, the Casablanca.
That's not a bad
special
book.
price for Friends of Rick. But yes, and I think that there is something inherently cinematic, and you get a sense of the budding screenwriter. And in fact, the anthology spans a period when young Billy does make that transition to writing scripts, even if they are these kind of, inchoate, not fully developed scripts, as in the case of People on Sunday, but also The Devil's Reporter, which he wrote in the late 20s. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do now, if you don't mind. I'm going to share a screen just so that people can see some of these images. I think it'll be
Sure.
helpful.
Sure.
And with the Devil's Report, I'm going to get there in just a second. But with the Devil's Reporter, so here is the cover for those who are curious about what the cover looks like. And you have young Billy, and we've got some images of Berlin street life in the background. But already as a teenager, as a 19-year-old, while still in Vienna, he managed to talk his way into contributing for two of the main tabloids in Vienna, Die Bühne, the stage, as well as Die Stunde, the hour. And here's a crossword puzzle that he provided, and you can see his name as was the case throughout his throughout the 1920s and into the 30s, writing it just with an IE at the end there. Here he is with, Max, the great theater impresario, Max Reinhardt, and this is the sort of the larger Max Reinhardt circle. I mentioned this Dr. Hans Liebstöckel, which is a funny name, because he also was the theater critic at Die Bühne, at this Viennese tabloid. And the story that Billy told late in life was that as a youngster, he was known to be assertive, and he had, as I call it in the editor's introduction, really had that kind of innate gift of gab. And so he talked his way into the editorial offices, and it was on a weekend. And this Dr. Liebstöckel, Hans Liebstöckel, was in his office, and as he walks in the office, apparently he's having sex with his secretary. And Liebstöckel returns to young Billy and says, "It's a good thing that I was working overtime." And it was soon after that he was hired to contribute pieces to Die Bühne as well as to Die Stunde. Here's his visiting card from the period. Die Stunde was the other major tabloid from Vienna. These were both part of, they both belonged to a Hungarian newspaper magnate by the name of Imre Bekesin. He was known for being somewhat shifty, but Billy found a home there, at least temporarily. And among the early pieces that he wrote was on the Manchester-based all-girl dance troupe, the Tiller Girls. And so this is the piece that you can see here. Die Tiller Girls sind da, the Tiller Girls are here. And he chronicles their arrival at the Westbahnhof railway station as a 19-year-old young man, and his fascination with these women. The way that he describes them, he sees first, he talks about how many legs are departing that train, and you can see the scene if you flash forward several decades. You can
like it hot, yeah.
Exactly. You can see the scene. Not only can you see the scene of Marilyn's great entrance on the Chicago platform heading to on the Florida Limited to Miami, but then also the famous scene in the berth in the night train. So he writes this already as a 19-year-old here, just a couple months shy of turning 20, and his ticket to Berlin was with the great American jazz band leader Paul Whiteman, who came to Vienna on one of the legs of his European tour. And Billy wrote a very flattering piece, and a piece in which, as you may recall, or in which he fixates on, as you can see here, Whiteman's mustache. And it's the mustache that is the signature of this man. And you can see young Billy behind, to the left behind Whiteman. And you can see, I think, already a certain confidence and an excitement being close to someone like this great American jazz band leader. So with the, or I should say, at the invitation of Paul Whiteman, Billy ends up following them to Berlin for the Berlin leg of their European tour, and he ends up staying in Berlin from that point onward. I did want to show you, this is kind of what prompted my wanting to share these images with you. I'm going to show you the Devil's Reporter, but while he was working as a freelancer and barely getting by, or when you mentioned that he was in a kind of near destitute state when he took that job working as a dancer for hire, a so-called taxi dancer, finally that became his meal ticket. But he was known at the time already then, even earlier in life and throughout his life, as something, and maybe you can corroborate this claim, as somebody who was a bit of a pacer, was kind of an inveterate, always on the move, a man on the move. And so he became known at this point in time too as der rasende Reporter, the racing reporter. And that's a caricature that was drawn. Here's that piece, Irwin, that you mentioned. Herr Ober, bitte einen Tänzer. Waiter, a dancer, please. And this is from the Viennese reprint. He was already based in Berlin. He'd already followed Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, and stayed there. But Die Bühne, this other tabloid, they did a reprint of it because I think it was such a magnificent piece, and I would love somebody to make a movie of it. I think it's enormously cinematic. So many aspects of it are just thoroughly cinematic. Here's the other. This is what prompted my wanting to share the images with you. This is the other one that I mentioned. And so the director of this one was Ernst Lemle. This is Uncle Carl's nephew. And so Carl Lemle, Universal Studio. This is his nephew Ernst Lemle. And this was a story that was about a reporter, much like young Billy. It starred an American actor named Eddie Polo. But in the film, and you can see it right here, is a little cameo by Billy, again, wearing the same kind of snap-brim hat that he is wearing in the Paul Whiteman photograph. And he often wore, at least the photos that I've managed to gain access to, he's often shown or photographed wearing a hat. But you can see him there, the second from left, doing that cameo. Here's a shot of the Berlin Zoologische Garten, another major train station there. And this is one of the rendezvous. I don't know whether you remember the piece in the collection called Berlin Rendezvous, which is about all the different spots in the city that are ideal for a little romantic tryst, a little love in the afternoon, if you like. And so that's one of the places that he refers to in his the piece that he contributed to the Berlin press, and then it makes its way into the script that he furnishes for the film. And so I'm going to show you just this 2-minute clip, and then I'll stop the share if that's all right. So why don't I just end? And this is Billy Wilder's love letter to Berlin on the eve of apocalypse, on the eve of the Nazis' rise to power. Again, it premiered at the Uferpalast am Kurfürstendamm in February of 1930. Here's just 2 minutes from it. People on Sunday, Menschen am Sonntag. right, stops right there. But then there's the rendezvous, the type of rendezvous that young Billy Wilder writes about in one of the pieces he contributes to the Berlin Popular Press called Berliner Rendezvous, Berlin Rendezvous. And so it's one of those moments you were mentioning, Irwin, where you can, I do my best to kind of trace some of them where you see that crossover into his films, initially in the ones that he did in Europe, and then also some anticipating some of the inspired ideas that he would have as a screenwriter, collaborating with, Charlie Brackett and his Diamond and many other collaborators during that long stretch as a writer director, racking up many awards and earning many fans.
Well, also, although it's not part of the book, obviously, when you look back on, the cinema history for the last 50 years, and you see probably the best film noir the movie made, which is Double Indemnity, the most raucous comedy is Some Like It Hot, the greatest drama is Sunset Boulevard, the most modern sex without any sex movie is The Apartment. You just look through them, and there's no one genre, but every one of the genres are the special movie. And a lot of it comes from how he grew up, where he grew up, what he was about. And the book is very fertile in all that setting. So it's great to read the book, pick out particular aspects of it, and then follow his career to some extent. It's really, really good. Just watching that rendezvous could make a movie right there. What happened to those two people? How did they actually, where were they before they started walking in the streets of Berlin? Did one of them have a girlfriend and who he just lost at the time? Did she have a boyfriend that she just lost? And they were both vulnerable to meet. It's delicious. Congratulations. Yeah. It's just, I can't get over it. It's so much fun.
Thank you. I can't take any credit for People on Sunday, but I'm so glad that you liked the pieces in Billy Wilder on Assignment. It was a really fun project to work on, and a very happy collaboration with the translator Shelley Fish, and also with the press. It's really been a delightful experience. And just as you were describing, reading them, they're a pleasure to read, and you can read them relatively quickly. And this was a project that from start to finish also just seemed to shoot right by, and was just filled with great joy at a time when we really needed it too. So it's great to have these pieces now finally reach an audience that previously had no access to them. So I'm very, very happy to see them enter into the world now again. And with any luck, who knows? Maybe apparently there've been some interest in some foreign translation. It'd be nice to see them reach additional audiences elsewhere across the globe. He's so beloved as a writer director in these far-flung regions across the world. It'd be nice to see these pieces find an audience in those same far-flung regions. So we'll see what happens. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
It'd also be great for the audience that grew up after Star Wars and see that there was great film history before that.
Yeah, he I think would agree with that, no doubt.
Noah,
yeah.
Can I interrupt to just ask a favor?
Please, bounce me.
I loved The Art of Little Ruses. I thought it was hysterically funny. And especially when I realized it was written by a 21-year-old man. Could you just read a little bit of that to give people the flavor of 21-year-old funny yet wise man?
I'd be happy to. I do happen to have the volume right next to me. I don't have that one marked, but I'll find it right now. It's easy.
It's on page 50. If that'll help.
I see it right there, and I'm gonna just read the opening. It's funny. It is a piece that people just seem to gravitate toward. And maybe if I read just the opening paragraph, people will understand why. And if not, Bert, maybe you and I can explain why. But let me go ahead and give this a whirl. So, The Art of Little Ruses. I don't want to come right out and insist that starting with this day, schools teach the art of lying, by which I mean using postures and facial expressions, gestures and inflections of the voice to convey the opposite of truth with sweeping powers of persuasion and achieve smashing success. I don't mean to demand it explicitly in the framework of pushing the latest educational reform, for I too am ensnared in a curiously outdated set of ideas, and I appreciate and honor the so-called truth. But I can easily imagine that in 2 or 3 decades, lies will be regarded as an indispensable and hence utterly unobjectionable implement in our daily lives. And their correct and appropriate use could be learned systematically by employing the scientific method. I could go on and read, but I think you get a sense. And it's funny. I was speaking with someone recently. People are drawn to this piece. It's a wonderful piece. And I don't know whether Wilder happened to be familiar with Oscar Wilde's On the Decay of Lying, but there is a really, really kind of subtle nod to that same kind of playfulness. And it does strike a certain resonance today, and it maybe that did so for you, Bert, when reading. We're really struggling with the truth and have been struggling with the truth for some time, it seems.
Well, no, it didn't. It wasn't the Kellyanne Conway, the President Trump's spokesperson after the inauguration, when she was questioned about the crowds, and she said, well, it's an alternate truth.
Exactly. Alternate reality, I think it was. Alternate reality. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. And then we had alternate facts. And anyway, the point of young Billy as a 22-year-old writing this piece, I think, is that,
Lie.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to get very far unless you know how to tell a good lie. And that's maybe what made him such a magnificent storyteller to begin with. I mean, he knew how to entertain, and how to
write. How did he learn to write? What is his background that allowed him?
That's
I
great.
I can only compare myself in my 20s to Billy Wilder and imagine how could I ever be like him? How did he get to be that?
So he completed his no undergraduate studies. He completed his high school education, the gymnasium as they call it, and did his diploma there, the Matura as they say in Austria, in the 8th district of Vienna, in the Josefstadt. He was not an outstanding student, and in fact, he was known for being quite bored during his studies, and tell stories of being much more concerned. There was a hotel across the street from his gymnasium, from his high school, and it was a hotel by the hour, and so he used to like to watch people coming and going from the hotel. He was also known for playing a little bit of hooky. You can almost picture, a little scene from Truffaut, 400 Blows, sneaking on, going to the movies, and he would, any excuse to get to the movies. How, Bert, he mastered the art of stringing together a sentence and telling a good story. I think he had just the keen powers of observation. He observed people in his midst and learned how to tell a good story from what he saw. And look, and to embroider a little bit here and there, to embellish a little bit there, here and there, and make the story that much better. But I don't, he was not some sort of, I don't know whether later in life, I wouldn't be at all surprised. And Irwin, here you are to maybe answer this question: whether he was very book smart and a big reader, but as a young man, he certainly knew, and he writes. In fact, among the pieces in the collection, he writes about the state of fiction writing and literature and so forth. So he clearly knew what was happening, but he was not, an ace student.
Well,
So
I think basically
of an autodidact, perhaps. Go ahead, Irwin.
I think it's always hard to really say where did the talent come from. The talent is there somehow. It comes out because it is talent and it is good. I think, but he was able to seize the moment constantly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people with talent that don't actually have an opportunity to express it. He found ways to push himself with the right people in the right circumstances, so he was able to express whatever talent he had, and he had a great deal of talent.
Yeah, that's for sure. There's no question about that, but we don't know exactly where it came from.
But that's
um,
the secret of creativity, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he grew up in the initially in the provinces of Galicia, you know, what was still Austro-Hungary. Made his way to Vienna, um, and was kind of filled, I think, with ambition and with that eye toward America, and an eye on motion pictures in their infancy.
But I
Um,
think
yeah,
the atmosphere in Vienna and the coffee houses
yeah.
and the people, it had a great creativity to it.
No,
And
no question. The cultural ferment was there, and I think he picked up and thrived on it. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, you're right. There's a nice little piece. It's one of the early pieces in the collection, a kind of ode to the Viennese coffee house.
yeah.
And that is where the you know the writers and theater people and dancers and musicians all gathered. And he found the equivalent place at the Romanisches Café, this legendary coffee house on Kurfürstendamm, on one of the major boulevards of Berlin. And yes, that's in fact, that's where, I mean, I showed you the 2 minutes from People on Sunday, but that's where the idea was hatched. And it was this great group of budding Hollywood transplants who brought it to life. I saw in the chat, someone was noting also Nebensaal. Yeah, that was, Nebensaal was, so Seymour Nebensaal was the uncle of Kurt and Robert Siodmak. And they also got some money from their uncle. I mentioned the money that Omer had brought with him from his days working in the art department at Universal and churning out two real Westerns with William Wyler. He was assistant to William Wyler on the lot at Universal. But
Yeah,
yes,
Uncle
yeah, go ahead.
Carl was apparently very, very generous with his friends and relatives.
Could you repeat that once more? Who
Uncle
or
Carl Lemley.
Uncle Carl, yeah. Uncle Carl Lemley had a big family, is what they used to say, right? That's an Ogden Nash quip, I think. And he would hold court around this table. I think on Sundays he would have people around. You know, not only Junior, but I think also.
And he gave him all jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there you had, you know, Ernst Lemle working in Berlin on the Teufelsreporter, the hell of a reporter. Absolutely, and he was very fond. You know, he was one of the many German-speaking, you know, film professionals in Hollywood at that period, and he'd arrived considerably earlier than those who fled the Hitler regime. But he was good about hiring them, especially those that had a connection to the family. But yes, absolutely. There's some questions that are coming up now in the chat, and I'm going to do my best. Maybe Bert, if you can look as well. I'm a terrible multitasker, but I'm looking. There's an initial question about who we'd cast. Irwin, maybe you want to take a swat at this one. Who would you cast as the young Billy Wilder, and why?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about it. Give me a minute. Let's get another question while I'm thinking.
Okay, all right. You think about that one. That's a good one.
Hey, one thing, he's so unique. I couldn't name offhand a name or a known actor that could play him. He could only play himself. He was so special in his wit and his personality and his bearing that it would be hard to. First of all, I guess you'd say, are you talking about the 93-year-old Billy Wilder, or are you talking about the 23-year-old Billy Wilder?
I think here was the young Wilder in particular. We're looking for casting choices. We can all put our heads together. Maybe we can come up with someone good.
Well, if anybody has an idea online, please text it in.
Yeah, exactly. We need it.
Yeah, you can put it down in the chat.
Yeah,
I got a question that came straight to me here, and from John. John wants to know, Billy goes back to Berlin to make A Foreign Affair and then 1, 2, 3. What was it like for Wilder to go back after time abroad and having fled?
Yeah, it wasn't his first time, A Foreign Affair. In fact, he came back in U.S. Army uniform to work with the Czech filmmaker Hanuš Burger on this film called Todesmühlen, Death Mills, which was a documentary film that was to be shown to Germans, a form of re-education or denazification immediately after the war. So he'd already been back for that. But
One, two, three.
Say it again.
What about 1, 2, 3?
And then that's right. No, then we have Foreign Affair and then 1, 2, 3. Absolutely. And in both instances, it's this mix of somebody who clearly still has an emotional attachment to that world, but is wickedly funny and is uncompromising in terms of applying pressure to this half-hearted denazification effort in the post-war period, and showing, who was still somehow tied to the regime, and who, including Marlene Dietrich, of course, in A Foreign Affair, and then the assistant Schlemmer in 1, 2, 3, who's always clicking his heels together. And then, of course, you have Stalag 17 as well. We can't forget about Stalag.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And so I think he is, still, it's a sort of a tricky balancing act for him. And Irwin, you actually knew him. He had a thick accent his whole life. I know this from audio recordings and various, awards acceptance speeches and so forth. But he was American, and yet he still was. His Diamond talks about this.
He was very, very continental. Although he was American, he was still very continental.
Yeah, yeah, and he returned to these sources, and that's so in this collection too. We have. It's funny. I mentioned Love I was joking about Little Love in the Afternoon. Those romantic trysts in Berlin. But you have the profile of Claude Anet, and Claude Anet. That's the Love in the Afternoon is based on his play Ariane, la jeune fille russe, Ariane, the Russian girl, that then gets adapted to that Audrey Hepburn then goes on to play in Love in the Afternoon. There was another question here though too about how it was that Billy got this audacious interview. I like that phrasing. With the ultra wealthy Cornelius Vanderbilt. Look, this was somebody who was able to talk. Look, he initially talked his way into the editorial offices at Die Bühne and Die Stunde, those two tabloids in Vienna, and he talked his way into interviewing not just the Cornelius Vanderbilt interview is something else, but also who am I thinking of now? We've got well, first of all, there are two pieces that are devoted to the Prince of Wales. I mentioned the title piece from that one collection, The Prince of Wales Goes on Holiday, but then there's another one where he can't seem to get the Prince of Wales, and so instead he goes to the Bristol Hotel the Imperial in Vienna, and finds some Brit who will serve as a stand-in. So he was just endlessly resourceful. And as he tells in later interviews, I can't remember whether this was which of these interviews, could have been with Cameron Crowe, could have been elsewhere, but he said that he learned very quickly to ask questions and to do so with absolute lack of shame. Just shame. He left shame, checked it at the door, and just he would. The other interview that I was thinking of though, where he also managed to sort of talk his way in. Oh yes, was with Asta Nielsen, who was one of the great screen sirens of the silent period, and also a great stage actress. And he talks his way into her dressing room, and ends up striking up a conversation with her and her Russian actor husband. So he really had no shame, and not only that, had boundless determination and ambition. And so I think that combination was quite a potent cocktail for him, possibly as potent as the dry martinis that apparently he was known to mix, and drove Raymond Chandler to distraction in doing so on Double Indemnity in their ill-fated collaboration. That picture is an absolute masterpiece, or when you're so correct, one of the greatest noirs ever, if not the greatest noir ever made. But the collaboration with Chandler was not a happy one. Are there other? Let's see. Did Billy?
Yeah, there's one about Wilder's wife. Was his wife Audrey a cultural influence on him and his work?
certainly late in life when they began. And I don't know, Irwin, maybe you can tell me when they began. They had an extraordinary art collection, and they collected art in the certainly in the final decades of his life. I don't know when the art collection began. That's something I need to know. Um, but she definitely was an influence. And she traveled with him also to Europe quite frequently. There was one trip, however, where Billy went on his own, and it's a very funny story. She says, I need some Chervet ties. You need to bring back Chervet ties and a bidet. She wanted a bidet. Bidet were kind of they're becoming, I think, all the rage in certain circles. And Billy, while in Paris, dashes off a telegram to her, to Audrey, and says, managed to get Chervet ties. No luck on the bidet. You're going to need to do a headstand in the shower. That's Wilder. That was not meant as a dodge of the question, but for some reason that story came to mind. And another example
Can we ask Irwin about a favorite story that he might have
Yes.
about Billy Wilder?
I think we should.
Yeah, the favorite story, in fact, I told it. I was at some awards show that went on and on and on. After about 4 hours of everybody introducing each other and all the folks getting an award, I got up there and it was about 11:30 at night, and everybody was absolutely exhausted. And I told a story that Billy Wilder told many, many times, and that is he went to see his doctor, and he said to his doctor, "Doctor, I can't pee." And the doctor said to him, "Well, how old are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm 93." And the doctor said, "Well, you peed enough." And that's my favorite story, because you have to end an awards night with that story and get the hell out of there.
He told it, I think, at one of the awards ceremonies, didn't he?
That's why I picked it up and used it.
Yeah. That's a great one. That's a real great one. It's priceless. Look, Miles, we have Shelley here. I'm wondering whether can we unmute Shelley? Is that possible? Because it'd be great for people, I think. Can you do that?
Yes, I can. Let me get her on here.
Because it'd be great for people to hear, I think, about the process of translation. It's so important, to render these texts in English is no easy feat, as I said, and everyone has been praising the quality of these translations. So I thought, Shelley, is there a way that we can hear from you? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, you just did.
I know I did.
Let me get these headphones off.
I'm afraid, Shelley, it's probably not going to be the last time either, but I did. You have a lot of accolades here among the many people praising your work as translator on this
Well,
volume.
I'm delighted that they're enjoying the book. It's as you said before, it was a lot of fun for us to do, and it's wonderful that we found excited readers as well as translators and editors.
Yeah.
It's been a good project all around. Problems in translation. Let's see.
No problems, but we've done a few events together, and you've spoken of some of the things that you had to kind of come to terms with when translating someone like Wilder.
Well, there's there are regionalisms. There's some Berlin slang. There's some Vienna slang. There are all different kinds of registers. There's Billy Wilder being sly, and it's hard to know exactly how to capture that humor that's neither belly laugh nor too subtle to be caught. It's somewhere in the middle. Yeah. And you try to sort of get that sly roundabout humor into your language, and it's fun when it works. And I think it worked pretty often, so we were pretty happy with that. One of the problems with translating many things from German into English is how much English is sprinkled in and what to do with the English that's there. In the story about the Tiller girls spoke mangled German here and there, and the mangling process is probably not easy to give English language readers a sense of. We left them in German. The grammar was all off and so on. So we decided after a little bit of back and forth. One thing you really don't want to do is do some kind of equivalent mangling of the English language. That really wouldn't work. So we just threw them in italics. And for those who know some German, it's intriguing to see the violence that they did to the German language. For those who don't know it, it just looks nice and exotic, I suppose. We, as Noah said before, we spent a lot of time thinking about which texts would come together nicely for this volume, and that was a lot of fun too. And Noah had some wonderful ways of grouping them with section introductions that made some sense out of the vast array of topics that Billy Wilder covered in his journalism. He was just all over the place, and we kept that. We wanted that, but at the same time, we wanted the stories to hang together in some way and feel like a coherent compilation. And I think the way that we put them into sections made it seem as though Billy Wilder intended those stories to be together. At least I hope so.
Yeah, it seems to work. I don't know. We've gotten some good feedback tonight, Shelley, as you may have, may have heard. So people are very happy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to be all that awake. I'm on the East Coast.
Yeah.
This is
Like
a rather advanced hour. That's why I kind of stayed in the background.
Thank you for
I think I'm still awake.
And unmuting yourself as we do now in this Zoom world.
Crazy world. Are we going to go back to the other way? It's kind of hard to say.
We'll see. Let's hope. Anyway, thank you very much for that. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but of course I did. So
you did, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a fun project. I would love to talk about it as much as possible, because it really lit a spark in us, and we'd like to think that other readers are enjoying it as well.
Hope so. And we did so also at a time when we really needed more spark. That's for sure.
Yeah, this was a pandemic book. And we couldn't even go to movie theaters.
No.
Our local movie theater here in Princeton, we just learned today in the local rag called Town Topics, is opening in a couple of weeks. And so we finally have a movie theater back in Princeton. So things are opening up, and masks are coming down in proper ways, and we're getting there. I think we're really almost there.
In our last 5 minutes or so, Noah, could you pick out? We have a bunch of questions in the chat, and maybe you can address them. I know there's one about Wilder, Nazism, and there are just a lot of interested people.
There are. There's one for Shelley, since you're here with us, Shelley. It says, if you translate a German colloquialism, do you use an English equivalent? People are curious about that. Inquiring minds want to know.
If I'm interpreting the question right, trying to hit the same it's either trying to hit the same register or trying to get in a kind of dialect. If the latter, I hate putting dialect, that's US specific dialect, into translations from German. I don't think that works at all. But you can, with register, you can do different levels of formality and informality, and capture it that way. But something that always gives me the chills, if something is written in Bavarian German or something like that, to try to give it a Southern drawl in English, I think is almost always misguided.
I'm speaking from Austin, Texas, and Bavarian is often translated, and when people do it the way that you make you cringe, is it gives it kind of a Texan inflection or something like that. Which
I don't think that transfers well at all.
Yeah. I agree. There's one other question that was above. Were there any texts or articles that ended up? Oh yeah, we did cut. We cut
We got a lot. Mhm.
yeah, a decent amount. Who knows? Maybe we'll need to do another volume, Shelley, a companion.
Well, as you said, they wound up on the cutting floor, and that wasn't entirely coincidental. So,
No.
I think we got the cream of the crop in what we did. But there's certainly more there that could be drawn on. If any one of you is a
Yeah.
a compiler of such things.
The idea was to put together a representative collection of the writings, and thanks to Shelley's translations, also to give audiences a chance to really experience the voice of young Billy Wilder, working as not only as a dancer for hire, but as a freelance reporter and budding screenwriter. And that I think we managed to achieve, if I may humbly say so, Shelley.
I think so. I mean, it's been gratifying, certainly, to read the reviews, which seem to be as on fire about it as we are. So
There's-
that's a
yeah.
nice feedback.
That is always a warm feeling when people are responding with the kind of ardor and love that we've managed to. In fact, Bert, that's what you had read the piece, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly.
And then that prompted you to write an email to me.
I turned into a stalker of you. How
Yeah,
about a
no,
last question? We'll
Yeah,
pick
there's
one of
one last question for Irwin. Did you have a favorite article in the book that seemed hilariously representative of your friend? That's for you, Irwin.
Yeah, well, I just think the first four stories about him being a paid for hire dancer really was incisive. It represented who he was, how he could be incredibly polite under the worst of circumstances, and which is part of what makes a good film director, by the way. And how he dealt with independent people. Some were difficult, but he always seemed to get along. And I think it represented he made some really tough films, and yet he got along. He never wavered.
So let me, it's time, and Shelley has to get to bed there in Princeton, New Jersey. So let me thank Irwin and Noah. This has really been a fantastic evening. When it's on our YouTube channel, people will be clamoring to see this and dissect it. I'm hoping Noah will now next turn his attention to the Irwin Winkler career and
There we go.
digging in historically there. Miles, how can people get a copy of this wonderful, important, and surprising book?
People can get a copy with the signed bookplate through our store at chevaliersbooks.com. I've just posted the link in the chat. You can also buy general copies through bookshop.org. I've got a lovely copy here. It's gorgeous. So go to our website, or if you're in LA, you can also stop by in person at Chevalier's and get yourself a copy. So thank you all so much for joining us here. Like Bert said, we will have the YouTube recording of this posted soon. So if you want to see us again, or someone wasn't here and they wanted to see it, they'll be on our YouTube channel, Chevalier's Books, right there. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you at our next event.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Take good care.